Factions are huge in movies and video games, and they can be in Dungeons and Dragons too. There can be factions of war of good and evil that your players have to join one to help take down the other, or both factions could be very neutral and the parties have actual choice to be able to see, oh, which one do we need to go to? Or maybe they enter into a town that has a faction they have to build reputation up with before they're able to do certain things, accomplish little tasks for them, and then they get rewards, whether it's actual item rewards or character upgrade rewards. And if they wanted to, they could join that faction and get even more perks and benefits. That's why we're breaking down factions into the 4 key components you need to think about before implementing them into your game, a resource to help you build your own faction and ways I've used it myself. So why would you want to use factions in your game? You can already probably see some benefits that you can have in your game. And if I miss anything here, comment below and let me know different ways that you have used factions in D&D. But a quest giver is a very first simple one. They want something from somebody that's part of a faction in a bigger overarching picture, and they have to do quests in order to get it. Factions can tie into the story as far as this group of people and their goals and motivations as to why they're doing certain things, and if the players want to join or oppose them. And either way, if they join or oppose them, there could be other factions at play that are going against that faction that they could join as well. Or maybe they join both of them and become double agents. You can use these factions to issue out rewards, whether it's physical, tangible items or actual character upgrades or roleplay abilities to be able to, I'm part of this faction, yeah, and then people let you into access to it you wouldn't otherwise have. So when implementing a faction, here are the 4 things you want to think about. The first one are goals. There's 3 different types of goals here. You have your ultimate goal, the big picture plan, the master plan of why this faction exists in the first place. Then you have an immediate goal. Maybe it's a short-term goal, just like whenever you're setting goals in real life, you gotta have small goals that lead up to the big goal. What is their most recent, current, immediate goal? And then there's a future goal, which is like a pipe dream, hope, and wish that this group and faction is pushing towards. An example. So maybe this hypothetical faction's ultimate goal is to help people, something very vague. You don't have to, you can be as specific or as vague as you want to in this whenever you're fleshing this thing out, and it probably can become more specific over time. But this faction ultimately just wants to help people. Maybe it's steal from the rich and give to the poor, like a Robin Hood type of faction. And that's all you need for the ultimate goal. So then maybe you have an immediate goal, something that's happening right now. Maybe there's a certain faction that you're in opposition of that's trying to stop you from doing this thing you're doing. So you have to navigate and kind of weave around them, or maybe cut off resources or something, and that's your immediate problem to take care of that. And then another immediate issue is maybe there's a big festival coming up for the rich that you want to prepare and plan to be able to take down and steal from. And then maybe the future goal of this whole thing is to do this so often and so much that you disable the people stopping you, and you stop the rich, and you steal so much from the rich that you balance out the economy and the whole thing, and there's your ultimate goal, is to take over the city and solve poverty maybe. And now you right now probably have opinions of this faction that I just made up here on the fly, and would you join them? Would you oppose them? Maybe at first you join them, and as soon as you find out some of the implications of what their plans are and what they're going for and what means they're able to go through, which we'll get into some of the other 4 key parts here with this hypothetical faction we'll keep going with. Maybe talking to this faction and finding out their goals and that there's another faction trying to stop them makes you want to go join that faction. There's a whole bunch you can do with goals as far as tying them into the story that's going on, tying them into your character's backstory possibly. Some factions having a time-based goal, it could accelerate the plot in some ways and add some pressure. And speaking of goals, if you have a goal to ease your game prep time and be able to ease the creation of these type of homebrew things, because this happens all the time as dungeon masters. We have to flush out parts of the world. We want to make a faction, and you're watching this video because maybe you want to make a faction, and then where is a resource to help almost do it for you, and then all the brunt of the work can be done, and then you can just polish it off from there. That's why this month I'm releasing the Build a Faction PDF, a full PDF resource that goes through everything I'm saying here and more, full of tables. I have a table of faction goals. There's 20 different options for different goals that a faction could have, and then you could take them, twist them, and run with it. This resource walks you through step by step to create an entire faction. You can do it over and over again to create endless amounts of factions. And every single month for my patrons, I release a DC playbook, which has full of universal resources you could use in your games right now. Every month for my patrons, I make a special and unique, different kind of homebrew PDF that's something very specific, in this case, a faction. And I also release a general use PDF that has monsters, magic items, bonus level up perks for your characters, NPCs, a ton of different stuff that you can just use month after month. It is the #1 way to help support what I do here, and it is thanks to all of my patrons that we have gotten this far. So truly, thank you. Now let's get back to building those factions. The second thing you need to think about when you're building this faction is the archetype. What type of faction is this thing? And here's what I mean by this. I'm actually going to read through the PDF as far as the general categories here right now. You have academics as far as the faction goes. Maybe it's a librarians, schools type of situation where knowledge is a very, very important aspect of that. Artisans, people that craft and build stuff in some ways, and maybe they have a masonry faction and they are trying to build things while somebody else is trying to tear them down. So there you go. Authorities can be a faction. Usually you can tie this maybe a political network or a governing body in some way, of a court of some kind can be a faction. And then you also have conclaves, which is usually like hermits and nomads and druids and stuff. Maybe they're more secretive and alluring. Maybe it has to do with nature. Who knows? Then there's martial factions, which can go from everywhere from simple mercenaries to all the way to an army. Outlaw factions can be assassins, bandits, and thieves. Zealot factions are usually religious based in some way and tied to their deity of some way. And you also, I guess, could spin the zealot thing, which in some ways could have a positive connotation, and maybe not though. And you could spin that on its head and do a cult faction as well. Another cool thing that me and my team did here with these factions is give membership perks. If you're a part of the faction, you get some perks here. And this is different depending on the archetype. So we're going to use the martial archetype here, and there's a legionnaire member perk. And if you are a member of this faction and you are within 5 feet of another member of this faction, you gain +1 to your armor class. You are part of this faction, standing side by side with another ally of the same faction, able to go back to back and defend each other. Because together you're stronger than apart. Let's go. So that's another thing I'd honestly challenge you to do when I talked about it as rewards as well. Instead of like, oh, you get these items. No. What if you become a certain, as you work your way up through the ranks of this faction, you get more and more perks because of the different tenets that they've taught you, whether they're actually teaching you how to use these certain things or teaching you how to fight and train you up. That's another great time to use downtime to be able to show the passage of time of them teaching you these things and being a part of a city and a part of a faction over time. The third thing for a faction is the flavor. Now, flavor is super cool because you have, in general, flavor can change an entire class. I've had a group before of 3 warlocks. Yes, they had different subclasses, but I heavily focused on their different flavor of how they casted their spells. What did it look like? And the biggest difference between all of them was more so the flavor than it was even their own subclass. So the couple things about this here for the flavor is the theme. Is what do they look like? Do they have an outfit? Do they have a color palette that they always use? Do they have maybe a certain garb that they always wear? They always wear capes with a brooch on it. They always wear a left arm bracer but not a right one. And all of that also gets into the symbol. What's the symbol of this faction that they stand for that you can see and identify? Then there's also the morality. I think this is interesting. I do think this is part of flavor because you could have an entire faction and have them be a certain way and then take a morality flavor and flavor it towards the negative. Maybe that Robin Hood faction, if you have them be immoral and bad and negative and evil, maybe they would go to any lengths. They would kill people to be able to steal this rich and gold and do all this type of stuff. Or if I shift that morality over to the far good side, maybe they would never, like almost like Batman rules where they won't kill anyone. And this morality flavor can be very open-handed or secretive, and you can make sure it's very obvious or kind of play it in the middle and see what they do, and then you can decide what the true motives are. Then the fourth thing of these factions is the structure. You got to think about the size. How big is this faction? Is it a group of like 10 people that are secretively operating underneath in the sewer system of a city? Or is this an entire governing body and it's like the king and his court are this faction that you are associated with? And then you got to ask yourself about the hierarchy. If you wanted to join this faction, how would you work your way up through the ranks? It's a great question to ask yourself whenever you're building a faction. What if the players joined it? If they joined, how would they join? Like the process of being not a faction member to being a faction member. How does that work? And then how do they work their way up the ranks to the top? And could they be the top? Maybe that's a goal. Maybe there's a part of a situation in your campaign where the story leads them to only this person can make this decision to do something. And if the players become that person, overthrow that person, they could accomplish the goal. And speaking of all this hierarchy stuff, we also have to name these things. What are the different names of these titles as you work your way up through? The first homebrew campaign I ever ran had a faction called the 7th Templar, and I flushed them out and they were weaved throughout the entire story and plot of the game leading up to the big good guy, and they were a part of his faction, right? So I had to think of the different ranks. How many ranks do they have? Well, it's the 7th Templar. I had 7 different ranks, so I had to come up with 7 different ranks for this thing. And how you moved up the ranks was all knowledge based, because this group, the 7th Templar, is about amassing knowledge and figuring out stuff, keeping secrets away, and being able to have information be a very, very important thing. And this was important, and it has helped build into the lore of the campaign. So in order to go from rank 1 to 2, they'd ask you a question, and if you could answer that question, if you knew the answer to that question, you would rank up. And these questions got increasingly more and more difficult, to the point where they would try and rank up, and like they'd go from rank 3 to 4, and the person would ask them the question, and they'd be like, wait, I don't even know who that is. I'm like, well, there you go. And so now they have, if they want to work their way up through the ranks, they have to go figure out this part of it. They have to dive into the lore a little bit more, figure out what's going on, answer some questions. But I'll share more of that story in a minute. And then there's also a relationship thing as far as the structure goes. The structure of this faction, what are the relationships to other people around it, other factions around it, other groups of people. How does the city that the faction is involved with, if they're in the middle of a city, maybe they're on the outskirts of a city, but how does the city see this faction? Is it a good relationship with the city? Does this Robin Hood people, the people like, oh, that's part of the Robin Hood band, and they like them? Or are they hunted down in a similar to like Batman, Spider-Man way where they're a hero, but actually no, everyone's out to get them and the guards are always chasing them down? All right, so now here's a big picture of how I've used factions in a huge part of my campaigns. I just kind of talked about a second ago about the 7th Templar, and this is faction in the first huge homebrew campaign I did. And the peak of the faction play at its finest was when they arrived into the city of Pandora. And in the city of Pandora, there were 3 factions at play. There was the 7th Templar that the players already knew about and they were technically a part of. And then there was a group, a secret thieves guild type group called The End. And I could do a whole video about thieves guilds and how to name them and the secretive things and little key phrases that people can say. But let me know down below if you want to do a whole video on thieves guilds. But that was the second faction. And the third faction was actually a bank of some kind. It was a bank organization within the thing. But actually it wasn't a bank organization. That was just a front that they had for this secret cult that was connected to the big bad evil guy. So you had the 7th Templar, which was connected to the good guy, the evil cult situation posing as a bank that was connected to the bad guy, and The End. What was their intentions? What was their motives? These were obviously good and evil, but what were they all about? And whenever I ran this faction in the city, I purposely left that a little bit of a gray area. I wanted to let that breathe and think about, are they good? Are they bad? How are the players going to interact with them? If you want to talk about social intrigue and running things off like this, these 3 factions and how the players interacted with them and turned them against each other, who they're going to join, who they're going to help. At one point, they split the party and went and helped one and then also went with the other. And it ended with a bank heist where they went into the bank of the cult's bank, robbed a whole bunch of stuff, got out, and as they're running, both of the other factions appeared to help them, and they had to choose who to go with to escape with. It was a really cool way to see where their loyalties lied. And lots of things would change based on who they align themselves with, the rewards that they get, the different perks within the city, the different upgrades that they'd have. And there was entirely a possibility where they could have joined the evil faction as double agents and infiltrated the whole thing and done the same thing all by themselves. Factions can be a really, really cool thing to add into your game, whether it be a faction into a city or a faction with a group of NPCs that have nothing to do with the city. So many applications that use this, and I hope this video helps you do that. And if you want to take it to the next level with that help and have things of the work done for you, have a lot of the stuff done for you, and have guides to spark that inspiration, check out the link down in the description to Patreon. You can pick up that and the DC playbook for yourself. Or if you're watching this video later, there's also a link in the description to my website where you can pick it up on my website as well. So until next time, stay creative, think outside the box. Peace.